Welcome to my latest video. So before we get started, I just want to address a couple of elephants in the room. As you can see, elephant number one, this video is in portrait. Yep, portrait. I am pretty stupid, and for the first part of my filming of this table, I was just considering TikTok and Instagram videos and not thinking about YouTube and how important it was to film in landscape. Second elephant in the room has to be the fact that this table project is taking me a little while longer than I expected, so this video doesn't get to the fully completed tabletop finish, so it's going to be a two-part video to finish off the tabletop and get it presented as I want. Getting back to where we are with this tabletop itself, I started off with 3 pallets, broke down those 3 pallets, planed those 3 pallets through my thicknesser just to get them smooth sided, and then started to chop them down to a size where I thought they would be most useful. Generally I try and get a straight edge on each board, cut them down to about 38mm each. The reason I go for that size specifically is I can generally get 2 boards or 2 lengths out of each board. Once they're cut down, I then batch these into 8 different groups. That's going to become obvious later in the video why I've done that. Now they say failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and I seem to be doing a lot of that during this table project. In this situation I didn't have enough glue, so I had to go out and buy more glue. Simple thing really, but it really holds you back if you haven't got the glue. The shops are closed and you can't get any at that point in time, so it took me an extra day before I could go grab some glue. As you can see, I'm just gluing these up now into panels. The good thing about this was that because they were going into blocks, some of those blocks wouldn't have glue on, so when it came to the clamping process that you can see me doing now, I was actually able to glue all those blocks up together. One issue that I did find was because they were different lengths, some of them from the pallets, gluing up became a bit more of a struggle, and just getting them all level together was a bit more of a mission to do. But once they were all glued up, they came out pretty well. Just scraping some of the glue off there. I don't know if anyone else does that or they clean the glue off before they scrape, but that's the way I done it on this occasion. I then cut the ends off and was able to run those through the thicknesser once more just to get them all exactly the same height, so when it came to doing the next step of the project they'd be a lot easier to work with. Now, one thing I didn't take into consideration was the fact that some of these blocks, or should I say panels, however you want to say it, were going to be slightly different widths because each of the beams off the pallet was slightly different widths. So I did have to take some of the width off there. That actually turned out quite nice because when I was taking the next step that you're going to see, there was a difference in the thickness of some of the grains, which actually worked out really well. And this is the next step, so for some crazy reason I decided that I was going to cut them all down into 7cm blocks, and eventually those blocks will then lead to me making the table. These blocks did take a little while for me to cut, but the longest part of this little task was definitely having to sand them all individually, just making sure all those edges were smooth. This was like some biggest shoulder workout you could ever imagine. My shoulders were burning by the end of this. I was in 2 frames of mind whether to quit halfway through and do it the next day as well, but I struggled on, and well, we got some awesome looking blocks. As you can see with these being laid down, you can just see how nice the different colours from those blocks are. Once Blockville was finally completed and I'd sanded all those horrible little blocks, I got round to just doing a little mock-up of the layout. The trouble I had here was once I'd laid all the blocks out, I couldn't work out what length and width I could achieve from laying the blocks because the edges were all so rough. What I decided to do was do a little paper template. So I drew the size of the table that I thought I would want and laid the blocks out on that template. The next step from there for me was to get myself a bit of plyboard that these were all going to be glued onto. Once I'd worked out from the paper template where my blocks were going to lay, I got a piece of plyboard, drew my template onto that itself, and started to glue up the blocks and lay the blocks out on there. I, again, as always, got myself slightly confused, so I ended up on each block, once I'd glued a few down, I went back to my template and just drew a number on each of the blocks, or a shape on each of the blocks, just so I knew which block was going where and what direction it had to point. It was all a little bit confusing, but it turned out pretty nice in the end. This was a really cool part of the project. This is probably where I first had an idea of how the tabletop was going to look in the end. So going from a pallet itself to breaking those bits down to cutting them up. At this stage you could kind of get an idea of what the tabletop was really going to look like, and I was really happy, and well, more happy that nothing had gone wrong as of yet. As you can see, me being clumsy as I always am though, I managed to take the camera down and smack myself in the face. If I were to go back and do this part of the project again, I would probably spend more time on being super accurate with the size of the blocks. When I say the blocks were 70mm wide and 70mm deep, it was actually a case of some of them may have been like 7.1, 7.2 centimeters. When it came to the layout, I found that there was a slight gap in some of them. That's something that I did address later on by filling those gaps in. But on the whole, pretty happy with how they turned out. Once all those pieces had been stuck down, I left them for 24 hours to dry out nicely. Went back, marked up where my table edges were going to be, cut the ply down slightly, and then started to cut my edges roughly, just so I had an idea of where those lines were going to be and how this table was going to look in the end. Once that final edge was cut on the table, I took my project over to the table saw just to get a nice clean edge on there. Now this was actually pretty sketchy. I felt the blade was really struggling to get through there, and I got a good old bit of kickback to teach me a good lesson on how to use a table saw. That's a pretty worrying moment for me, to be honest. But as you can see, the end result of the table's looking pretty cool. I'm really happy with how the project's turned out so far. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you check out part 2 coming soon.